spent a few minutes trying to work out how to do Landscape Live. Welcome back to Sharpfokus Daily, which has been absent for a few weeks. Reasons for absence. Partly because I had an intern, which was taking up. Interns take up quite a lot of time because they don't know anything, and you have to teach them everything. Anyway, if anyone ever wants to do a bit of work experience, they can always come and join me for a few weeks. I am open to all suggestions, and they can help out with the Sharpfokus. So, yeah, I call this one the global one. So in Sharpfokus, we normally talk about the rupiah, the stock market, individual stocks, the Indonesian economy, and then the global situation. And there's just been so much going on the global front.
Why are you in suit today?
There's a story behind that. Well, I mean, I go through periods of wearing a suit all the time, but I don't always wear a tie. I was wearing a tie today because I was supposed to have, for the day job, a bunch of investors. An analyst, quite a well-known analyst, was going to come and see me this afternoon. And so I prepared a new presentation, a suit, a tie, some food, coffee, and they just cancelled. Apparently they have something more important going on in Tangerang. I cannot imagine what could possibly be more important. Anyway, that's priorities for you. Some people have different priorities. I think they're going to be missing out because I might have to go away this week. So they're saying, they just casually said we'll rearrange, assuming that it's easy to rearrange, which it may not be. Anyway, so that's why I have a suit and tie on. But yeah, there's been so many things going on globally, like China and America. Like China seems to be starting to, well, I think, anyway, we'll come back to that. You can see that China is forced to cave in. Right? They have to agree with whatever America says. But of course that got disturbed a bit by Huawei CFO being arrested. And then there's been the events in France. I don't know if you saw that. Paris, on literally, like, it looks like one of those computer games.
It's like Jakarta in '98.
It's like Jakarta in '98. It's like one of those computer games where you know, I saw the helicopter flying over and all the fires.
Anarchy.
Yeah, I think it's probably not as bad as all that, but and then in the UK tomorrow there's this big parliamentary vote about Brexit. Brexit is just going absolutely nuts, and there was a big demonstration in London yesterday. And in Brussels on Saturday, they tried to storm the European Parliament. So the same thing in France is going on in Belgium as well. It's just not getting as much publicity. In fact, I think there are a lot of demonstrations all over Europe. I don't know whether you saw that. In Denmark, this is extraordinary. The Danish Parliament is proposing that they are going to set up a new facility on a little island off the coast of Copenhagen to send immigrants to, like a prison island. Oh boy. And this is the same week the UN is trying to push through its like global law on migration. Unbelievable stuff going on, I think, at the moment. So many of these issues. But I would say that they all go back to the same thing, which is weak economic growth, crazy stuff going on in Europe with the EU. The UN is just like perpetually nuts, but they kind of come up with more and more ridiculous things all the time. But it seems to me that there's a major fight. We are seeing a major fight back now. The pro-capitalist, free market forces are it takes quite a lot of effort to get them up, because they're not as angry and vindictive as all the kind of left-wing climate change, United Nations, migration, socialists. But they are now up in arms, I think, all over the place. And I saw that, so the French president is now proposing more tax cuts.
Are they still, the highest bracket still 70%? 75, 70?
Oh, even worse. I think in France it's even worse than that. I don't even know what the number is, but you know that a few years ago the previous president did this thing like super tax on wealthy people. The tax in Europe is just insane, and no wonder the European economies have not been growing for 10 years now. Negative. I looked at it on Friday. I posted it on the Sharpfokus Daily on Friday. That if you look, 10 years ago, the top 10 EU economies were bigger than America in dollar GDP, and they were about 16 trillion together. The US was about 14. 10 years later, the US is almost 20, and those guys are now below 15. They're like 14 and falling. So there's now a big gap with the US much higher, and the European economies are heading to like half the value of the US. And then we're going to see the same thing with China, I think. China's economy is going to, well, it's already going down in US dollar terms, but it's set to do even worse than that, I think. But China is now desperately backpedaling, trying to cut tariffs for imports and open up their domestic market to other countries, but I'm guessing it's too little too late. But these are all the pro-growth, like China opening up, Europe looking to cut taxes finally, maybe having to slash taxes, and in Europe you can't. The problem in Europe is they can't cut taxes without cutting the social programs. They're going to have to slash the social programs. But that is going to be fantastic. They're going to finally start growing again, I think, in Europe. And then the UK is getting, it's such a struggle, but they are getting close to getting out of Europe. So ironically, all this news looks terrible, right? It looks very bad around the world, but I think it's going to be very, very, very positive. And you're now starting to see real things happen, which will have a positive impact on the economics in the coming years. And that's going to, in Indonesia, we are not, we've got an election coming up. We don't have any demonstrations yet.
No, not yet.
Not economic demonstrations.
Malaysia has demonstrations.
Yes, Malaysia started to have them.
Yeah.
So this is coming to Southeast Asia, I think. It's only a matter of time, I think, before. Well, I don't know how it would play out in Indonesia, but yeah, Malaysia is having them. It's sweeping around all over the place. I don't think necessarily that people know why these things are happening or who it is that's driving them or whatever. I don't think it really matters. There's just this mismatch between tax and spend in all these economies. The tax is too high, the spending and the programs are too high, and there's no more room to increase the tax. No more room. We were just looking at one of the listed companies with your analyst, and I just got a shock because I looked at the cash flow statement, and 90% plus. This is a commodity company, a mining company. 90% of their cash flow is going, more than 90% of their cash flow is going out in tax and royalty payments. It's cannot last, right? And they have negative cash flow. So in order to pay those, they're having to borrow more and more money. It's totally, people talk about sustainability. What is, they're talking about the wrong kind of sustainability. All this focus on environmental sustainability, but the commodity companies very existence is under threat because of tax and regulations. Where do you think the demonstrations could come in Indonesia? Bond traders on the streets.
Yeah. But I'm getting mixed signals. I think the government is responding to the request of certain segments of financial institutions, because we know that the banking industry is always the protected one. They have the biggest asset, the biggest earning. Um, the government seems to be in the past trying to protect the cash flow of the banking systems, because they see capital market or even the new technology finance as disruptions. Disruptions meaning will potentially reduce their profit, the banking system profits.
Yes.
We talk about potentially government is going to lower the interest rate for investors.
Oh, that was the other thing I wanted to mention. Yeah. So the other thing which is becoming quite clear from the US side is there is not going to be any more increase in interest rates. In fact, if anything, they're likely to come down. The yield curve is close to zero, right? And that must happen here too as well.
US also is showing sign that there is acceleration growth in the economy. That usually that triggers something with the Fed.
Well, but the bond yields are going.
Okay.
I think we are approaching now a complete reversal of people's opinion on what the Fed is going to do. That they're going to be more likely to cut. Trump will be proven correct again. That the Fed should never have increased the rates in the first place, and they're going to be kind of scrambling backwards now. But anyway, so
Right. And I just came back from Japan. It's organized. The trip was organized by the exchange, and I met with some of the fixed income traders, and they told me that they were summoned by the tax to talk about changing.
Oh, really?
The tax treatment from final to corporate tax, because the coordinator, coordinating
So
minister,
then you could offset losses with it, right?
the coordinating minister for finance telling them that the tax system that we have for the capital market is not going to work anymore.
Right.
You're not going to grow the market. It's big hurdles for efficient market, growing the customer base, the investor base, and as well as growing the derivative products, the products that we need to
Liquidity. Yeah.
to make the liquidity better, the hedging better.
Wow, that's big news. Any time frame on that?
No. I'm always skeptical on this because we've been trying.
Well, if they wait too long, they're gonna be too.
Yeah, the Indonesian interest has gone down so much in the last 20 years since '98.
Yeah.
They haven't changed a bit
Yeah.
on the way they're taxing the investors and the way they're taxing even for the financial institutions that involved in providing liquidity, providing the market making for the bond market.
Right.
So just
You could say it's a matter of time, but it could be.
no, it's unbelievable it
It's
lasts that
unbelievable.
long.
Yeah.
Unbelievable that they are not in tune to the
In the market.
yeah. So
Okay, so but some positive side. So I mean that fits in with this pattern, right? So there's these three things. One is that interest rates, I think, seem to definitely have peaked and can come down, and especially so in Indonesia. Two, that you see these countries having to switch to cutting taxes and cutting expenditure of government. The government shrinking, and that's got to be good for the private sector. And for me, one of the big ones is China, because China is just such an anti-growth economy because it sucks up growth from other places. Now China is heading into a more open, and it is the biggest net exporter in the world. So everybody has to buy its products. It doesn't buy very much. So now it's kind of switching to becoming an importer, which will be a net positive for global growth. So those three big trends, I think, despite the fact that it looks bad news on the surface, all of this is actually very, very good news. And if Indonesia, they've cut the palm oil tax.
Indonesia, yeah.
The export tax, that's one. So that's hopefully the sign to zero.
But
that was massive. Oh God.
It's been
that's a whole program in itself.
Yeah, but then they have done it like 2 weeks ago, I think.
Yeah. But that makes a big
But
difference.
surprisingly, the CPO price hasn't reacted.
Yeah, but net, that's like a more than 10% increase in price for the producers. You see what I mean? They take away the tax, but the price stays roughly the same. That means a net, because the tax was $50 on a $500 oil,
10%.
right? So that was minusing out 10%. If the price stays the same, the producers get to add 10% to their selling price. So that's a good step. And yeah, the commodity plays. It's hard to imagine what the tax and regulation on raw materials has just gone so nuts. Trump is cutting it. He just cut another one against coal in the US that they have to put some kind of methane. There was some extra equipment that they had to use before, and now they don't have to use it anymore. So that's helping to reduce their costs. So this is something that is going on around the world, and it will make a big difference. But Indonesia, it's just one small one in palm oil, because they're still having other things with coal and all the oil and royalties everywhere and just nuts. But anyway, so I think the key is that a lot of this looks negative, but in reality this is very, very positive on the global front, and we'll await more news on the bond tax thing in the next few weeks. All right. Don't hold your breath.
Don't raise your hope up
Okay.
too much.